Welcome to Crystal Clear Podcast. I'm Dr. Valerie Brown-Baul, and we are here today with a very, very special guest, someone I've known for years, and she's going to inspire you because she is an inspiration to me. And as you know, Crystal Clear Podcast is about self-knowledge, self-discovery, and self-mastery. And once we start to actualize and understand who we really are, we have power and we can overcome any challenge that faces us. But since this guest was a little girl, she has had adversity and challenges, but she has overcome them all. And I just want to introduce you to Dr. Vilicia Cade Lyles.
Right. Hey, how are you today, Reverend Dr. Val? It's wonderful to have this opportunity to join you for this very important conversation today.
Well, I am so glad I finally caught up with you because you are a busy lady, but now I think you have a little bit of downtime. So I said, let me get her while I can. Okay, so what we're going to do first, I know that my friend just got married, and so what she's going to do is put Dr. Vilicia Cade Lyles on the screen right now in front of you. And, when we get married, we forget, that changes who we are a little bit.
I named this. It didn't stay because I renamed it, and I guess it decided to change it back because I know I renamed myself Vilicia Cade.
My name is Dr. Valerie Brown-Baul. It's because we had a life before we got married. We got married somewhat in our little later years. So we want people to still know who we are and identify with who we are. But at the same time, we honor our spouses. So first of all, congratulations on your marriage. It was a beautiful wedding ceremony. But anyway, I want you to introduce who you are. And let's start off with, who is Dr. Vilicia Cade? Tell us about the woman, Dr. Vilicia Cade.
Well, you know what? I always start off by saying that I am a child of God because I know with certainty that God has had his hand on my life and he has introduced me into rooms and given me exposure to amazing things that have been unimaginable. I couldn't thought of being a part of some of the things that God has allowed me to be a part of. And so I would describe myself as a love-driven leader who believes in paying it forward and who understands the delicate ecosystem that I am because we are. The person who understands that leadership is a privilege and it's an honor and it's about service to others. And leadership is ordained by God, and we're called into spaces to do things in different seasons and times. And so this child of God, the youngest of 9 children in a family of 6 sisters and 2 brothers, the wife of a wonderful man who is so focused on family and edifying humanity to others, and my greatest contribution to the world, Curtis Anthony. I am because of God, and I am a love-driven leader.
Man, I love that. I have to say amen to that because I like how we redefine a servant leader. I was serving other people, but I like the way you put it, love leader. You're rooted and grounded in love, and you operate. But you know what? When I did a study on leadership, I found that some of the most impactful leaders led based on love, what they love, and so that means that that's who you really are. Now, I know you're a woman of God. I know you're a Zeta Phi Beta. I love that necklace. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
And so you have, we could be sitting here for hours talking about how wonderful you are and how God has truly blessed your life. But, I just want you to tell us a little bit about one of the challenges you had when you were a child growing up. Sometimes we say, oh, we can see our future and all, but did you always see yourself in this position? Just tell us a little bit about your childhood and how you've overcome some challenges.
Absolutely. And so in my first autobiographic published book, If Not for Love, I talk about the despair of growing up without the love of my family, without living in the space with my parents, the struggles of being in the system in New York City and being a ward of the state. I talk about that feeling and the trauma and a lot of the despair and the hopelessness that I felt as a child. When I was 6 years old, my life changed and I left the household of my parents. My mom had a medical condition and she suffered from mental health issues and she wasn't able to care for us. And my father, when he returned from the Korean War, struggled with addiction. And my 8 other siblings and I became wards of the state of New York. And I talk about in different places in the book how that robbed me of my hope, deprived me of my family's love, and at times put me in a place of despair. And I talked about how God would send different people during different times in my journey as a child to revitalize hope and to show me love through God's love. And so I always talk about God's love because I know what it's like to be a child, to not feel safe, to go to bed hungry, to wear hand-me-downs, to be ridiculed and laughed at, to struggle with learning because I am also dyslexic, to feel different, to feel like an imposter, and to feel unloved. And so when I talk about love-driven leadership, I'm talking about my personal experiences and coming into self-awareness and awakening on a spiritual level that I've always had a father who was always with me and I was always loved. And that wasn't always how I felt as a child. And many times I felt angry. I felt shut down. I felt depressed. But I'm coming full circle to finding within myself and through my spiritual relationship with God that God loves me and that He had a purpose for my life. And everything that I experienced in my journey to get to this place was engineered by His plan and by every chapter that He had for my life. And so I stand in gratitude. And so I have a responsibility to pay that love forward in my service to others. And so my childhood is the bedrock of who I've become. It used to be the symbol of shame. And I had to release the cloak of shame to step into the light of God's love to stand. And I'm just so grateful.
We don't realize God puts different people in your path, in your life for purpose. You know, we could be soulmates. We could be here for purpose to execute something that will impact the community. We don't know, but we have to seek God's face for that. But what I want to say, and I want you to unpack a couple of things. One was, you know, you were a ward of the state, you suffered with dyslexia. And also I remember reading your book and you talked about how some people weren't giving you hope, but there were other people that God sent you to get hope. And like this woman has a doctorate degree. Tell us about your education, first of all, because dyslexia didn't stop you from being all God created you to be.
Absolutely. You know, I have a bachelor's degree, of course, and I have 3 master's degrees, and I have a doctorate, and I also completed an educational policy fellowship at Cleveland University. For me, the quest to learn continues as I'm exploring and in conversation with the University of Chicago to join their Leadership in Society initiative and to become a fellow as I think about the next chapters in my life. But education for me has always been a place where I have strived to use it to change the trajectory of my life. And I put a lot of work and time in, and by the grace of God, technology has really opened a lot of doors, because I remember even after completing my doctorate degree with dyslexia, it's a neurological, it impacts how you see information. So with me and dyslexia, what'll happen is I will write and words will be omitted or words will be transposed, like letters. I will be E and where E should be and I should be where E is, or I will drop articles like to, and it won't be there, but my brain will see it. And so you'll write grammatically incorrect. And so even as someone with a terminal degree, a doctoral degree, the process of writing is one of editing. So if you write an email and you put your eyes on the email and you send that's a draft. And very early in my career, I would write emails after I received my doctorate. And I remember at one point, in a job where I was serving in a leadership role as a director and a supervisor. And I wrote an email and it was late, and there were grammatical errors in the email. And some people were highlighting the grammatical errors in the emails and laughing at me. And, and I used to say that, why is it that we as educators understand that when we're educating children who have learning disabilities and we provide them with accommodations, you know what? When they go off to college, they're going to provide them with accommodations. And when they go into the world of work, they're going to still need accommodations. They're still going to need support because the way their brain processes information is not going to change. But now with certain technology tools like Dragon Speak and different tools that I can use, that I can self-correct after the first draft if I look at something and then I come back to it. But that was something that I had to overcome, and is why I've got 3 masters, because I wasn't confident that I could get a doctorate. I thought that, they were going to figure out that I'm really not smart because I have this disability. It's just all about hard work and editing and refining your work. And now technology tools give us the opportunity to accelerate that. It takes me a little longer than it takes other people, if I go through the editing process,
Yeah. Well, yeah. And, and that's interesting because you entered into the world of education because you understood this. There must have been a purpose in you really knowing how to overcome dyslexia, because now you have, a passion, not a passion, but you're empathetic or sympathetic to those people who may have a learning disability, as well as those people just see things differently. Doesn't mean you're not smart. It just means you have a different learning style, or that. So people need to understand that, and you're the right person to show them that you can overcome that. In this world, we say you have to do it this way, but God wired you this way, and you still succeeded, even though the world said you couldn't. And so, go ahead.
I think now they're talking about seeing things from an asset-based perspective and not a deficit. Now they're starting to see the growing body of research on neurodiverse learners, right? These are people who may be dyslexic. These are people who may have ADHD. These are people who may be on the spectrum for autism, neurodiverse learners. And they're beginning to see some of the benefits to these varied learning styles. Mm-hmm. Conversation is a national conversation, and we're beginning to understand that there are assets to this. So, words and how we describe, like you said, diverse learners. And that's why I always talk about equity being the path to excellence, because people need different things in order to really excel based on the gifts and the talents that they have. So I'm just lucky that I continued, and I did get a master's in reading so that I could better understand the process of reading, the phonological process and the science of reading. I'm very well versed in those things. And the self-awareness that I have of my own learning style is what has enabled me to overcome the hurdles of things that when people hit the wall, I've been able to overcome those hurdles because of my self-actualization and awareness of my strengths and where there are opportunities for me to grow.
Awesome. Wow. I tell you, this is going to be 2 parts because we're not going to be able to get through everything. So this is part 1, y'all, because we're going to have part 2. But I mean, this is so enlightening. Let's put it that way, enlightening. And so we talked about your childhood. We know you as as an overcomer. So your career, let's talk a little bit about your career, I got a question for you. Can you share a crystal clear moment in your life, a point when everything seemed to align?
There's 2 crystal clear moments that really stand out for me. And, I can talk about the most recent, or I can talk about when I went to Sandusky City Schools as the chief academic officer. And when I arrived in Sandusky City Schools, I was pretty fragile. And I had a really turbulent tenure in serving in a district in Delaware, which had a lot of superintendent turnover. and I had been the victim of some political bullying by some board members and discourse within the district when there isn't stable leadership, which is sort of natural when you're in the process of forming effective teams. There's this process that they talk about, storming, norming, and then, forming, right? There's truly this science. And when I was in a district for 9 years and I had 11 different superintendents, that is a disaster. That is a recipe for disaster.
Wow.
So when I got to Sandusky City Schools,
that's in another state, right? Sandusky,
Ohio.
Ohio, okay.
Blue Streaks, go Blue Streak. H-I-O. One of the highlights of my tenure in public service. When I got to Sandusky City Schools and I worked under the leadership of the bishop, Dr. Eugene T.W. Sanders, who was the CEO and superintendent. And he revitalized my hope. I didn't want to be a superintendent at that point. I'd seen what the superintendency does to women, and then the intersection of gender and race was even more exacerbating. And I'd seen so many people, particularly women, not fare well and become political casualties. When I got to Sandusky, I was able to really just grow to my full potential in a high functioning district with support. And I really began to excel and create programs. And then the pandemic happened and I really excelled during the pandemic. Everybody was going crazy and I was a creative monster, as Dr. Sanders would call me. He's like, my gosh, if you make one more recovery plan, I tell you. But I learned more about who I was as a leader and what I liked. And it became very crystal clear to me that program development was I had a very strong aptitude for creating programs. And then as I reflect back on my career, I can see where there were times in my career where I really excelled. It was when I was developing new programs. And so that was one crystal clear moment in my career. And then I felt obligated to go to the next level and serve as a superintendent, because I feel that, I talked about very early on in my love-driven leadership mind that I have to spend my life paying it forward. I can't remember who said it, but the rent that we pay to live on earth is service to others, right? And so I really internalized that. And I said, wow, I was ready to step out and become a superintendent. And then more recently, I think a crystal clear moment that I've had in my career it was time to step down. And I came to the space where I realized that you cannot manage chronic stress. You have to eliminate it. And for years, I've been trying to manage chronic stress. And at some point, my body physically started giving up on me. And so when I made the decision to shift from the president and CEO of Child Guidance Resource Centers and move into a strategic consultant role, I think that was God's blessing in disguise, because what God is allowing me to do is to really do some reflecting. It's a point of inflection, and doing some reflection on the things that He would have for me to do in my purpose, and how my purpose and passion culminate to this place of impact. And I realized that you don't have to be in the system to change the system. I've always been a transformer, a change agent, and I always thought that my path to making change within the systems was from within the system. And God had said to me, your work is outside of the system, right? And so now that was a crystal clear moment for me. You cannot manage chronic stress. You have to eliminate it. And why can't I live in the abundance of life and do the things that I am passionate about, the things that fully align to my purpose? Because in most leadership roles, there are things that you have to do, and there are things that you don't like to do that you have to do, and that you do that you like to do. And I always say to people, when I was CEO and superintendent of capital, we have these really, really high moments when you've got the National League of Innovative Schools coming in and you've been appointed to a presidential commission, or you've been appointed as a Google fellow, or you're going to ASU GSV and you're in the top 10 competition. And then you have those very low moments when you're in the newspaper because there was problems with the HVAC system, or there was a kid who brought a weapon in school, or there was a fight, and or someone's bullied, and everyone at the end of the day sees that you're the person who's accountable because you sit at the helm and you have to answer to the public, and you're in the newspaper, and people are chasing you, people are trying to interview you. So there are these lows and these highs, and there are things that you like to do, and then there are the things that you have to do that you don't necessarily want to do. Well, God said that this is your season of purpose and planning, and I'm preparing you to catapult your service outside of the system. So that was my clarifying moment when I decided to take on Sankofa Solutions of Love full time.
Love it. I love it. And, before you get into Sankofa, I just want to say, as you're talking, you know who you remind me of? You remind me of Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris. Yes, because I was just watching her, and she was saying she had a crystal clear moment where she realized being in the system, she thought being in the system, because her whole life is public service, and being in the system was going to, she was going to be able to change. But, God has taken her out of the system because everybody got excited. Everybody thought she was great. She was going to bring change, and she was a change agent, all that stuff. But she did not get into the presidency, which I think she should have. But God said he's positioning her outside of the system. So I'm excited to see what she's going to do. And I'm excited to see what God's going to use you to do, because I was impressed that you got, for President Biden, you were on his advisory education. What did you call it? The advisory education board, and you were there to represent African American and women and educators, and I was just so proud of you. I was like, oh wow, how did she, it's like God positions you. But that was preparation for what he's going to do. You had a lot of highs, like you said, and you had some lows, valleys, but you're going to have a lot more highs now because God has taken you out, and you're going to get to enjoy your life. And actually, when you're working, you're not going to feel like you're working, because you're going to do what you love to do.
Absolutely.
And that's exciting. That's exciting. You should be excited, but I noticed that you're taking care of yourself, and a lot of things that we talk about, crystal clear, is balancing, balancing life. And you talked about you have to eliminate stress. I had to eliminate stress too, because I was diagnosed with lupus in 2014. And stress was my friend. I thought stress was my friend. It was
not our friend. Stress is not our friend.
Stress is not your friend. And so finally I had to realize that, and I had to eliminate it. I couldn't balance it. I said, look, I'm gonna eliminate stress. So everything that I do, eat right, everything I do, get the candles out, relax, no crazy toxic people in my house, those kind of things. Those are the things we do to learn to balance and kick stress out of our lives. It's stress is going to try to sneak in there, but we have to have tools, and we have to have a strategy on how to get rid of stress. And that seems like what you're doing, because stress tried to take you down. I watched you, but you didn't. You're stronger than you know, but you realized it. And so you took action. And that's what we have to do, especially as women. Because we're pulled
dying from stroke and heart attack, right? Our symptoms are
yes,
water, and the disproportionality in the rate of how Black women are dying. And if we look at Black maternal health, it translates, it continues to the health of Black women, because we carry so much of the burden of our families, of the lack of balance and work-life balance, and feeling selfish because of self-care. And self-care is not being selfish, right? And being super.
I used to think so. I used to think I was Superwoman or Wonder Woman or whatever. We as women, especially ambitious women, we were told you got to work twice as hard, you got to stay up later, we got to prove ourselves, And, and some of it we had to do that. And when I was in corporate and all, but I am just thankful now I'm outside of the system, just like you're outside of the system now. So you get to be creative. And the book I just wrote was called Unleashing Your Creative Power. And I think that's where you're in a position to just let all of that that's you've learned and that's within you to just come out. It's going to be beautiful. And I walk with you during, you wrote two books. What are the names of the two books that you wrote? And you can find your book on Amazon, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Barnes and Nobles. If Not for Love is the first book, and Let Love Liberate You is the second book. And as I was working on the Love-Driven Leadership book, I have been in this space of shifting, and God had been shifting things in my life. And I thank my colleagues and the board at Child Guidance Resource Centers for a wonderful opportunity to make an impact in the field of mental health. But God had a different plan for my life. And grateful for this time to really create routines and structures that put my physical and my mental well-being at the forefront of my service to others, because it's got to be about longevity. And I was coming into that space when I was at Capital School District, where I was trying to launch employee wellness campaign, and I was talking about really engaging my staff and finding out what are the self-care things that we can do during the workday that add value to people's life, that help diminish stress, because I saw firsthand how the byproduct of the trauma that people experienced during COVID showed up in the K-12 space post-COVID, where everyone was focused on just students and families were absolutely experiencing trauma. So was the staff. And I felt very compelled to begin to think about focusing on a three-pronged approach that really put the self-care and self-awareness of the staff, so they could put the oxygen mask on, so they could help the kids and the families, and that compassionate fatigue and our lack of empathy and the lack of research available for us really understanding that impact of how this pandemic really impact the adults who are in educational spaces.
Yes.
Trying to grapple with not just the learning loss, but the social emotional delays and a lot of the trauma that the parents and the families are showing up with, So I had started, really looking at that and looking at some research about joy and happiness, and because it's about longevity. And I realized that my body started giving up on me, my body started giving up on me. And I had to come into awareness that this wasn't just stress, this was stress. And I had to eliminate it to save myself. And so now, I have been working diligently on work-life balance with creating structures that I do food prep, once a week, where I eat healthy, I walk daily. I focus on 10,000 steps. I focus on exercising and stretching. I've played pickleball and taken a pickleball class. And so all of these things, and daily meditation and prayer, right? Life, right? It starts with your spiritual life.